What's up, everybody? We're back. Corey Hughes, Bloody History. So we've been doing the family jewels, and honestly, I'm really fucking getting pissed off and disappointed with the family jewels. So you got the CIA, who the family jewels are supposed to be them coming clean on everything, right? Okay? So you got to think, going back to 47, they were tied up in fucking Roswell, aliens, false flag propaganda, fucking homicides, murders. They were tied up with the fucking mob, and that they're giving us fucking documents on how they might have accidentally given some information to non-agency employees. Are you fucking kidding me? It's the biggest fucking distraction I've ever seen. We're 200 pages into the family jewels. I think we're 200 pages in. Let me look real quick. 171 pages out of 700 pages, and they're junk. They're junk. Okay? It's complete distraction. They were engaged in such horrific, illegal, and unmoral and unethical shit, and yet they want to come clean about giving information over to other agencies that they shouldn't have. Like, fuck you, okay? Fuck you. So I'm getting really pissed off with that shit. And so we're going to go back to some Jack Ruby for the next couple days. Because we got 4,000 pages of Jack Ruby to get through, and we're only 10% of the way through it. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to do some more Jack Ruby. It should be part 11. We'll probably do through part 13 or 14, and then we'll go back to Family Jewels for a little bit. But I'm telling you, man, these Family Jewels are bullshit. They're bullshit. All right? And there's so much more dirt that they're not coming clean on. It's like, fuck you. All right, November 27, 63. The director and SACs at Dallas and Chicago. Once again, the headings are Jack Ruby, a.k.a. Lee Harvey Oswald, a.k.a. deceased civil rights background, read Jack Ruby. Earl Ruby telephonically advised S.A. Charles I. Robichaud today that since he was interviewed, we recalled the following additional individuals as being close friends of the subject. Michael Levine, an attorney who maintains an office on South LaSalle Street, Chicago, exact address unknown. Levine was not only close friends of subject, but acted as subject's attorney at various times. Maury Kellerman, owner, Glove Glass Company, Chicago, Illinois, exact address unknown. Barney Ross, former renowned prize fighter, whereabouts unknown. Chicago interview Levin and Kelman. It is noted that New York is presently endeavoring to locate and interview Ross. So Jack Ruby knew Barney Ross. Number 2763. Mrs. Jerry Vaughn, manager, apartments 223 Clinton Avenue, Minneapolis, Minnesota, advised Mr. and Mrs. Harold Mandery vacated their apartment sometime after November 23rd, 63, without giving notice. Said their rent was paid to December 1st, 63. However, they were obligated to pay for the month of December. Mrs. Vaughn had no information as to their possible present whereabouts. UACB, no further investigation being conducted by Minneapolis. However, submitted to Dallas. Interesting little weird tidbits, right? November 26, 63, to Director FBI in Chicago and Dallas. Reference Jack Ruby. Ruby's San Francisco past employment and residence. Remember, he was in San Francisco for a very short time in the 1930s, I believe. Results, additional interviews today at San Francisco follows. Bernie Barish, liquor salesman, 5846 Avenue. San Francisco, new subject is Jack Rubenstein in Chicago. As both raised in the same neighborhood. Barish left Chicago many years ago. Next, he met Rubenstein in San Francisco, approximately 1938. 1938. At that time, Barish was a prize fighter, and Rubenstein hung around the gym where Barish trained. Stated Rubenstein resided 333 or 335 Jones Street with Sister Eva Grant. Stated Rubenstein sold subscriptions to San Francisco newspaper at the time. They knew of no other employment for Rubenstein or any illegal activities. Jack Stevenson, 35 Parkside Avenue, Daly City, California, pawnbroker at 1546 Street, San Francisco, advised that he knew Jack Ruby at San Francisco during period approximately 1935 to 1938. Knew him only as Sparky. Did not associate Ruby with Dallas killings till he saw the name of Eva Grant, Ruby's sister, mentioned in San Francisco newspapers. Stevenson did not associate with Ruby, but knows Ruby was soliciting subscriptions to San Francisco newspaper. Unable to identify which newspaper employed Ruby. Believes Ruby resided with Eva Grant at the Herald Hotel, San Francisco. Last saw Ruby about 1938. Heard from some source, not recalled, that Ruby was in a nightclub business in Dallas. Lewis Swift, owner, distributors of L Distributors, 552 McAllister Street, San Francisco, advised he knew Ruby as Sparky. 1938 to 1939, when Sparky was employed as a subscription salesman for San Francisco. Examiner newspaper stated met Sparky through individual known as Stoney, now residing in Chicago, address unknown to Swift, states Sparky frequented Eiley Newman's gym in San Francisco, has not seen or heard of Ruby for many years. Rudolph Dutch Tockie, Tokkie, LaSalle Hotel, San Francisco, states he met Sparky through Stoney, who was identical with H. Solivet, 4750 Clarendon, Chicago, Illinois. Telephone Randolph 84002. Recalls Sparky resided Eddy Street, San Francisco. First met Sparky 1937 or 1938. Met Sparky's sister Eva Grant in San Francisco and later saw her in Dallas, 1947 or 48. Believes Eva resided in San Francisco with Freddie Graham, family formerly of San Francisco who now reside in Brisbane, California. Further describes Stoney as having had a cigar stand in the Joe Louis nightclub in Las Vegas, Nevada, which failed. Freddie Graham, 72 San Benito Road, Brisbane, California, unable to furnish any information regarding Ruby. Name Eva Grant sounds familiar, but Grant did not reside in Graham residence. Rick Jordan, reporter, San Francisco, Examiner, advises no information appears in newspaper personnel, identical with subject. Herb Bafsky, B-A-F-S-K-Y, owner, Yorkshire Clothing Store, Redwood City, California, advises he was former crew manager, Circulation Department, San Francisco, Examiner, during period approximately 1938 to 1939, states, name Sparky sounds familiar to him as possible subscription salesman. Cannot recall anything regarding this individual. States there were many persons from Chicago area employed by this department during the period mentioned. Chicago locate and interview H. Solovit, address and telephone number above for any information regarding Ruby, in particular Ruby's activities for the period residence in San Francisco. 11/29/63, background of Ruby. November 27 last, Harry Beecher, 1621 Longbourn, Cincinnati. Telephonically advised that Edna at Peggy's Beauty Salon in the Keith Building in Cincinnati knows a jewelry salesman who claims that he knew Ruby in Poland before he came to Chicago. Investigation, Cincinnati, shows that one Leo Blumin, B-L-U-M-I-N, jewelry salesman, Perth Amboy, New Jersey, telephone number Hillcrest 25826, was watching newscast November 25 last with Albert M. Cooper, Cooper & Company, 817 Main Street, Cincinnati. Ruby observed on TV, and Blumen commented that Ruby looked like someone he had known in Warsaw, Poland. Said he lived in the home of one Jack Rubenstein in Warsaw and resembled Ruby. Blumen also told Cooper that the Rubenstein he knew in Poland was a devout communist and had fought on the side of communists in Spain. That's definitely not fucking Jack Ruby. Cooper stated Blumen left him with the impression that Ruby and Jack Rubenstein he had known in Poland were two different individuals, but in some way resembled each other. Newark locate and interview Blumen. Urgent, 11/25/63, reference Jack Leon Ruby. Lee Harvey Oswald, buried in Rose Hill burial plot. 7301 East Lancaster, Fort Worth, Texas, late this afternoon. Graveside ceremonies. Only people in attendance were his wife, mother, brother, and his two small children, and some representatives of the news media. No flowers except from family. No guest book, and pallbearers were representatives of the news media. Funeral arrangements handled by Miller Funeral Home, 5805 Bowie Boulevard, Fort Worth. Interesting. 11/24/63, reference Jack Ruby. Los Angeles indices negative concerning Mary Emery, E-M-E-R-Y. Don't know why they were looking for her. Los Angeles conducting no further investigation. 11/25/63, reference Jack Ruby. On 11/24 and 11/25/63, Harold Jerome, looks like Mandaree, Minneapolis, Minnesota, advised S.A. Francis Grady and S.A. Trentwith Bassford that he and his wife were spending an evening with Mrs. Shirley Horst, H-O-R-S-T, in Kansas City, Missouri, on or about 9/23 last. They were discussing former business associates. Mandaree alleges that Mrs. Horst asked him if he knew Lee Harvey. She said his true name was Lee Harvey Oswald. She also asked if he knew Jack Ruby, who ran the Carousel Bar in Dallas, Texas. According to Mandery, Mrs. Horst stated that Oswald said he was a communist, and if he got an opportunity to kill the president, he would. Mandery stated he recalled above names after hearing the newscast. During interview, he referred to Oswald as Oswell and referred to Ruby as Reuben. Mandery had difficulty remembering the names of the interviewing agents and admitted on the evening of the conversation in question both he and his wife were drinking heavily. Mrs. Horst was interviewed and denied making the alleged statements. She said she had never heard the names Rubenstein, Ruby, or Oswald until she heard them on the newscast. She was shown newspaper photos of Ruby and Oswald and advised that she's never seen the men. Mrs. Horst was re-interviewed in the presence of Mandery and his wife. Mandery repeated the allegations, and Mrs. Horst categorically denied them. Mrs. Horst advised that her husband owns 50% of the Merle V. Watson radio and television production of Peoria, Illinois, and her husband had to fire Mandery for low production. She said that Mandery threatened to blow the Watson advertising operation, meaning he would injure its reputation. She stated that both Mandery and his wife have the reputation of being alcoholics. Mandery is alleged to have published the Colorado Law, a law enforcement journal. Allegations are that ads and subscriptions were sold by Mandery, but the magazine was not published. The magazine is alleged to be bankrupt. And you have a whole sentence redacted here. Stated Mandery and his wife drink to excess and is very unreliable. Then you have another one redacted, who knew Mandery as bellhop at the Russell Hotel in Minneapolis in about 1949, stated he was not to be trusted, would do anything for a buck, and while a bellhop engaged in bootlegging and pimping. Mandery admits too many arrests for drunk and disorderly, disturbing the peace, fighting in bars, and on one occasion being arrested after a holdup with guns in his car. He explains most of these arrests are being the fault of someone else. His present wife was not aware of these arrests. Records Minneapolis PD disclosed Harold Mandery was arrested as a juvenile 7/30/33 and released to mother on 7/30/47, taxi application 9/8/47, assault and battery, 30 days stayed. On 5/22/48, found in disorderly house, fined $25 or 10 days paid fine. On 9/7/48, disorderly conduct, 6 days floater. On 8/18/50, non-support, 45 days stayed. When first interviewed, he denied above arrests. Harold Mandery described MWA, date of birth 6/2/9/21, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Mrs. Mandery described FWA, date of birth 11/12/19. They're not affiliated with any, or they deny being affiliated with any subversive organizations. Look like just a bunch of drunks. Denver determined reputation and reliability of Mandery, who operated Colorado Law in Denver. Investigations continue in Minneapolis. 11/25/63. Rebutel, November 25 instant in Salt Lake City. Phone call to Phoenix, November 25 instant. Mrs. Redacted, whole sentence redacted here. Salt Lake City advised that her husband is being transferred from Phoenix to Salt Lake City by Redacted. About 10 or 11 years ago, Mrs. Redacted parents managed Redacted in Phoenix, Arizona for one Redacted, who allegedly owned the Redacted and the Redacted, both Phoenix. Redacted is described as very kind and generous to the underdog, but had a terrible temper and no respect for police. Claimed he could buy any member of the Phoenix PD. Also claimed to have used many different names and moved frequently. Redacted saw a 1954 photograph of subject Ruby on television, immediately identified him as Redacted. She stated, Redacted always had a large sum of money. That was about 10 years ago, and he obtained loans from a number of loan companies in Phoenix and left town. She has no information concerning him since that time and knows nothing further concerning his associates or activities. Redacted stated her mother was former security informant of Phoenix office who was contacted by an agent Redacted. Does not know if mother is current informant, but stated about 10 years ago, mother found 2 subversive newspapers in Redacted room and reported them to FBI. Redacted could not further describe these newspapers. Even though vigorously pressed, Redacted steadfastly refused to identify her mother or other members of her family, fearing they would be harmed. She said her parents lived near Phoenix and that her father's a disabled veteran. Mrs. Redacted, 2 children, aged 11 and 12, were living with parents. Redacted admitted being afflicted with epilepsy and having had brain surgery. As suggested in reference phone call, Phoenix identify redacted, determine if identical with subject Ruby, and contact any additional one for investigation. Criminal informants located to date in this office have no pertinent information subject reference Ruby. Next one, 1125. Jack Leon Ruby. Dr. Henry C. Riegler, Riegler, 7108 Rockwood Road, Little Rock, Arkansas, advised today that in telephone conversation with his daughter, Marguerite Riegler, Riegler, during the night of November 24 last, he learned the following. Marguerite Riegler and Rita Silverman, students, SMU, advised in the company of two unknown males, had dinner in Phil's Delicatessen, Dallas, approximately 10 p.m. November 22 last, and while their individual now believed to be identical with Jack Ruby requested use of their newspaper on 3 occasions, believed turned to entertainment section, and on each occasion made several telephone calls from a booth. Referring to President Kennedy's death in the newspaper, the individual stated, quote, "Isn't that a horrible thing?" and left the establishment. Girls of opinion, this was Ruby because he mentioned to them, quote, "I own the carousel in Vegas," end quote, and instructed them that when they grew up to come see him, and he would give them some tickets for the show at these establishments. Dr. Riegler desires his daughter to be contacted only through his personal friend, looks like Wordy Evans, administrator of Juliet Fowler Christian Home, 5810 Riegler Street. What? So their name is Riegler, and they're on Riegler Street? What are the odds of that? Whom he had instructed to counsel and handle for his daughter since he does not want her in the limelight. Dr. Riegler states his daughter advised him she has been in touch with the Dallas Police Department, but they had not contacted her. (112663) From SAC Chicago, Jack Ruby, Lee Harvey Oswald. Theodore Schulman, President, Santax Corporation, 2321 North Wolcott, and Executive Director of the Waste Trade Industry, Chicago, advised S.A. William L. Bailey that he became acquainted with Jack Rubenstein approximately 30 years ago, at which time Rubenstein was employed as an organizer with the Waste Material Handlers Federal Labor Union. Rubenstein always exhibited a, quote, highly emotional attitude and seemed to get overly excited about things that didn't go his way. Specifically, he recalled Rubenstein advocated the union strike at the smallest provocation. Rubenstein in late 1930s or early 40s left the union after it was taken over by Paul Dorfman and spent 3 or 4 years around Chicago scratching for a living. He recalled Rubenstein, after leaving the union, sold tickets for sporting events and was known to him as a scalper. Rubenstein had no connections with the organized criminal or hoodlum element and was very little in his ticket-selling operation. Rubenstein once spoke of a sister in Dallas and indicated he had a brother in Chicago, names unknown. He's seen Rubenstein only on about 2 occasions in the last 20 years, and each of those occasions he ran into Rubenstein in the Chicago area. He's not seen or heard from Rubenstein in the past 5 to 10 years. Rubenstein had to leave the union because, quote, of his temperament, unquote, in that Rubenstein would get so excited when he handled a complaint from a union member. He would threaten to call a strike and shut down a company before the grievance could be discussed. Schulman said he could not furnish any further specific information regarding Rubenstein, but commented Rubenstein, quote, had a good heart and seemed to do as much as he possibly could to help his family, unquote. Next one, 112563. Mrs. Gladys Kearns, owner, Klein's Restaurant, 4161 West Madison, residence 5732, North Christiana, Chicago, today advised SA's George Woodley and Robert Baker as follows. She advised that immediately subsequent to the murder of Lee Harvey Oswald by Jack Rubenstein, this was publicized on TV broadcasts, and her husband, Louis Kearns, Kernes, while working at the cash register in this restaurant, exclaimed in a loud tone of voice, "I know that man." She said that apparently some customer called the newspapers, and that since that offhand statement, she and her husband have been besieged by press inquiries. She advised that her husband greatly overstated his knowledge and that he would, in all probability, not recognize Jack Rubenstein if he met him. She advised that in the 1930s, she resided at 362 West Lexington in Chicago, and that the Rubenstein family lived 3 or 4 houses down from her residence. The family consisted of 4 boys and 4 girls, and the elder Mr. Rubenstein was a retired carpenter. She said that she played cards 3 or 4 times with the sister whose first name was Eva and knew her to be a divorcee. She said the last she knew of Rubenstein's family 8 or 9 years ago and was aware that Jack Rubenstein resided in Dallas because she had been told that his sister Eva had moved there and was associated with him in the business in that city. She stated that she considered the Rubenstein family to be normal, decent people and that she's never heard anything that would indicate Jack Rubenstein has ever been associated with hoodlum elements. She stated she had no knowledge of connections that he may have had with the Dallas Police Department. Redacted, reputed to be Redacted in Chicago, was contacted at Redacted by SA's August Kempf and John Roberts. Redacted stated that he had no knowledge of Jack Ruby, does not recall anyone by that name being in the Chicago area. Redacted said that if Ruby was active in the Chicago area, he may have seen him but does not remember him. Redacted made a point of stating if Ruby had been connected, he would have known about him. Redacted was then asked whether Ruby could have been active in the Capone organization, and Redacted replied by stating, quote, "I just told you he was not connected." In a further discussion concerning Jack Ruby on the murder of Oswald, Redacted was asked whether he had any knowledge of an association between Ruby and the Dallas Police Department. Redacted stated that he had no knowledge of such associations and did not know anything concerning Ruby except what he had read in the newspapers and seen on television. During this interview of Redacted, it is noted that there were 4 other visitors present, one of whom was identified as Redacted, a known associate of Redacted and gambling payoff man. The others were unidentified. However, none of these persons admitted to knowing Jack Ruby, a.k.a., or having any information whatsoever concerning him. Mr. Art, looks like Retaque, R-E-T-A-C-Q-U-E, reporter, Chicago Sun-Times, advised SA's Jack Hendricks and Robert Noel that relative to his article appearing on page 4 of November 25, 1963, issue of Chicago Sun-Times captioned, quote, "Ruby a misguided patriot," say. He interviewed Ruby's brothers Hyman and Earl Rubenstein on November 24, 1963. They told him their brother killed Lee Oswald for only one reason. He's a good patriotic American and that he got carried away. They said that they phoned their sisters, Mr. Eva Grant in Dallas. Immediately after hearing that Ruby had slain Oswald, and she related Ruby came to her home immediately after President Kennedy was assassinated, that he broke down and cried at Mrs. Kennedy's anguish. They said he had no doubt that Oswald had killed the president, and he believed Oswald would be put in a mental institution. He felt this was not enough, and he wanted to avenge Mrs. Kennedy. They related that Ruby had contributed to President Kennedy's campaign fund, and he believed President Kennedy was the nation's greatest leader. Hyman told Pettigrew that Ruby would not kill Oswald to become a hero. He did it to set an example of how a person like Oswald should be punished. Ruby's brothers and other people acquainted with him related that Ruby was an ardent admirer of President Franklin Roosevelt and would fight with anyone who made a slurring remark about Roosevelt. Pettigrew said he knew Ruby around 25 years and that about 17 years ago he went to Dallas to manage a tavern for his sister and later became owner of this tavern. He believed Ruby changed his name because of anti-Semitism in Dallas and not because of anything he had done in Chicago. Well, it doesn't explain why all of his brothers changed the last name, too. He recalls that Ruby grew up in the Roosevelt Avenue area of Chicago where hoodlums lived and operated, and that, like anyone living in that area, he was acquainted with most of the hoodlums. He believed Ruby never closely associated with any hoodlums and recalls that he never got himself involved in any serious trouble. At most, he was involved in a punchboard operation, but never arrested in this regard. He had the reputation of a street brawler, never had any steady job, but occupied himself as a ticket scalper, salesman of assorted goods, small-time promoter, program hawker at sports events, etc. Pettigrew recalls Ruby belonged to a Chicago South Side, quote, Dave Miller gang. Dave Miller is Dave Yaris. During the early 1940s, and his gang would gang fight Nazi Bund groups. That's hilarious. Let me screenshot this. From his personal knowledge and information from Ruby's acquaintances, he believed Ruby has always been a loyal, patriotic American. He has no knowledge that Ruby or his sister Eva Grant had any connections with the Dallas Police Department or with any hoodlums in Dallas. He had no personal knowledge concerning Ruby's union activities. However, Hyman Rubenstein told him that Ruby was a labor organizer of the waste handler union during the 1930s for a few months. All right, next one. November 26th. Jack Leon Ruby, etc., blah, blah, blah. Earl Ruby, 29925 Woodland Drive, Southfield, Michigan, interviewed for 4:15 p.m., 11:25 last, by essays Charles Robichaud and Jack Wilson. Earl arrived Detroit, Michigan from Chicago, 11:30 a.m., 11:25 last via airline, being met by wife Marge and cop Milton G. Sackett, Southfield, Michigan PD, and held press conference at residence from 2:30 p.m. till about 3:30 p.m., verified by Chief Sackett. Earl Ruby, very cooperative during interview and welcomed any further inquiry. Recaptioned matter. Earl advised his parents are deceased, has no living aunts or uncles, and only surviving immediate members of family are his brothers and sisters. Following are the brothers and sisters with accompanying background data, plus pertinent comments regarding subject Jack Ruby, bachelor approximately, date of birth 5/15/11, Chicago. Was in World War II, exact dates unknown, employed by Earl Products, owned by Earl Ruby in Chicago, approximately 6 months, 1946 to 1947. Prior to World War II, employed by Spartan Novelty Company, Chicago, now defunct, dates unknown, cannot recall places of employment prior to Spartan, but various places as salesman. Shortly after leaving service, about 1946, he was employed by Earl Products for approximately 6 months. After leaving service, subject Jack and brother Sam given equal shares in Earl Products. Shortly after this arrangement, Earl and Sam Ruby decided Jack not giving his full share of time in partnership, and a personality conflict existed between Sam and Jack Ruby. Sam and Earl bought out subject's interest in the business. Shortly thereafter, Jack had offer from sister Mrs. Eva Grant to help her operate nightclub, Dallas, Texas. Subject departed for Dallas for this purpose approximately 17 years ago. Subject's been in nightclub business in Dallas ever since and has made infrequent visits to Chicago for deaths, marriages, and the like. Subject's closest associates in Chicago are Benjamin K., K-A-Y-E, owner Rogers Park Ford Agency, 6600 Block, Northwestern Avenue, Chicago. Lifelong friend, former Chicago policeman, Harry, looks like Epstein, who resides north end of Chicago and believed to operate Lakeview Sales, Chicago, a firm selling business gifts, Mike Nemzin, owner, Wiener's Department Store, West Roosevelt, Chicago, home address unknown. Nemzin recently had serious operation, 11/20 last. Dallas close associate, Ralph Paul, residence and business address unknown, but in restaurant business and first name unknown, believed Frank Howard. Business and residence unknown. Subject sister Mrs. Grant. Will know identity. Residence and employment of Paul and Howard subject to grammar school. Name unrecalled, but in 1100 Block Mozart, Chicago, with Lenny Patrick. Patrick known by Earl Ruby from publicity to be infamous hoodlum, Chicago. Earl has no knowledge of subject's association with Patrick, except on one occasion, date unknown. Subject mentioned he had gone to grammar school with Patrick. Patrick not generally known to the Ruby family. Recalls that Lenny Patrick was the black sheep of the family. Patrick's father was a Chicago policeman, Jack Patrick, brother of Lenny, who was allegedly respectable, married a distant cousin, about 4 or 5 times removed from the Rubies. Her name is Weinberg. Earl had no knowledge of this family. Earl believed Art Pettigrew, reporter, Chicago Sun-Times, news subject, but does not know under what circumstances. Earl advised he met Pettigrew on 11/20 for last when Pettigrew came to Hyman Rubenstein's residence in Chicago seeking an interview, referenced the victim's shooting. Earl claimed they were keeping out all reporters, however, when Pettigrew mentioned subject personally and mentioned the names Ben K., previously mentioned, and Izzy Horowitz as mutual friend. He admitted Pettigrew and gave him formal press interview. Earl said this is the only indication he'd ever had subject knew Pettigrew. Relative to Erwin Weiner, Earl said he did not know of core line 9. Earl believed Art Pettigrew, etc. Line 11, date is 11/24, and line 13, no, this is just a correction, never mind. Any individual, Irving. However, he knew Erwin Weiner, a bondsman and insurance salesman who went to high school with him. Earl had no knowledge that Weiner knew his brother Jack, but may have had a speaking acquaintance. regarding Gus Valley. Earl advised that as far as he knew, subject did not know Alex. Oh, Gus Alex. Gus Alex. Sorry, mobster Gus Alex. Greek Gus Alex. Earl advised that as far as he knew, subject did not know Alex in any shape or manner. Earl said Alex is evidently well-known in Chicago from the news media, but Earl does not know him, and reiterated he has no knowledge that subject knows him. Earl stated victim's name is absolutely unknown to him, even after viewing photos in press and on TV. Felt safe to say the victim, either by name or photo, is unknown to his entire family, including subject. Stated victim is, quote, a complete stranger, unquote, to the entire family. Earl had no knowledge as to why Jack should have shot the victim. Earl said subject very emotional. Earl said he talked to sister Eva Grant, 11/24 last, at which time he advised subject after hearing President Kennedy's death, proceeded to synagogue, cried afterwards, was very depressed. Earl said subject is definitely a patriot and would defend any president of the U.S., Democrat or Republican, if challenged verbally, even to the point of fisticuffs. Earl said subject hated anything un-American, said the subject had never been convicted of any crime he knew of, although he was aware there had been several charges, exact date unknown, of fighting and possession of concealed weapon. Earl said so far as he knew, the fighting charges were dismissed since he was evicting unruly customers from his business establishments. Earl said the only time he knew subject to carry a gun was when he was carrying large sums of money as a result of business. The only knowledge of this was during times Earl spent in Dallas with his brother for about 10 and 7 days, respectively, about 4 years ago. Caliber, make, etc. of gun carried by subject on these occasions, unknown. Earl stated the only reason he can think of concerning incident is subject patriotism and his grief over president's death. Earl advised he could not state why subject had gun in the end. Possession on this occasion, when, as far as he knew, subject carried gun only when he had sums of money. Therefore, Earl could not make a determination whether this might have been premeditated. Earl furnished following background info existing relatives, brothers Hyman Rubenstein, born 12/28/01 in the Old Country, resides 10044 Loyola, Chicago, self-employed florist, supply distributor, Chicago, operates from residence, entered this country with parents at age 1, and as a bachelor, resided Chicago lifetime except when in U.S. Army during World War II, was employed by Floral Company, possibly National Florist Supply, Chicago. Sam Ruby, wife Phyllis, Nee Kearns, housewife, married about 12 and one half years ago, resides Texas, unknown address in Dallas. They don't say in Dallas. How the fuck can they not say in Dallas? Address unknown, born Chicago, 12/29/13 approximately, self-employed, operating about 3 laundromats in Dallas. Sam associated with Earl Products, Chicago, until about 1961, at which time he moved to Dallas to Fort Worth to work for subject. In Dallas, did not like this type business with Jack and obtained above laundromat business. Served in the U.S. Air Force during World War II, dates unknown. Shortly prior to World War II, Carpenter Building Barracks, Great Lakes Naval Training Station, Chicago. Father and 4 sons carpenters by trade at one time or another. Earl cannot recall Sam's employment prior to, I can't read that, but did stay employed for some time in the 30s with his brother-in-law Ralph Volpert in Youngstown, Ohio, with a home improvement company. Earl Ruby, born Chicago, 4/16/15, wife Marge, Nee Green, married January 1947, entered U.S. Navy, Seabees, whatever that is, April 42 until 44, except for military service, resided in Chicago, lifetime, until October 21/61, when he moved to Detroit, graduated Crane Tech High School, 1934, part-time work while attending high school and short time thereafter, employed Stanley Oliver Manufacturing Company, Chicago, independent operator for dry cleaning establishment, 1937 to 39. Employed as a carpenter, barracks, GLNTS, don't know what the fuck that is. 1939 to 42, U.S. Navy, 1942 to 44. Owned Earl E. Core Line, whatever that is. Earl Products, 1944 to 1961, sold business. Owner Cobo Cleaners, 18135 Livernois, Detroit, 1961 to present. sisters, Mrs. Ralph Ann Volpert, date and place of birth unknown, widow, 60 years. Husband died Chicago about 3 years ago. Moved from Youngstown, Ohio about 4 years ago. Residence at Youngstown 246 Elm Street for approximately 20 years. Husband employed for his brother at National Home Improvement, Youngstown. She's employed as housewife. Presently resides with brother Hyman Rubenstein. Mrs. Norman Marion Carroll, born Chicago, date unknown, age 56, resides with brother Hyman Rubenstein. Has been employed past 25 years approximately by U.S. Government Treasury Department, bond section in Chicago. So how fucking weird is that? Jack Ruby has a sister named Mrs. Norman Marion Carroll, born in Chicago, date unknown, who's been working for the Treasury Department for 25 fucking years. Wild, huh? Miss Eva Grant, born Chicago, date unknown, age 53, divorced, husband's first name unknown, resides Dallas off and on past 20 years. When not in Dallas, resided Chicago for brief periods. Employed in Dallas by brother, subject. Currently possesses telephone number LA 66258. Earl believed that she was the one who convinced Jack to come to Dallas about 16 and 17 years ago. She had a small nightclub and asked subject to operate the same. Gave up his original nightclub, and now he operates 2 nightclubs in Dallas. Earl does not believe she has any momentary or monetary interest in either club. Mrs. Harold Eileen Kaminsky, 6724 North Dalkin, Chicago. Her husband is a public accountant believed to operate from home. She is a housewife from Chicago, date unknown, 46 years old. Earl advised that the above is complete family. There were no adopted children or otherwise. Earl advised that he is leaving Detroit the afternoon of November 27 next and will drive to his wife's parents' residence at 7209 North Prairie, Lincolnwood, Illinois. Telephone number, etc., for Thanksgiving, and will return to Detroit on Sunday, November 30th. Chicago will locate and interview Benjamin K. Rogers Park Ford Agency, 6600 Block Northwestern Avenue, Chicago, and Harry Epstein, who is believed to operate Lakeview Sales in Chicago. For pertinent info, reference subject and or victim. Dallas interview for pertinent info, Ralph Paul, who was in the restaurant business in Dallas and believed to be Frank Howard, business and residence unknown for both. Earl advised that sister Eva Grant will know the whereabouts of these 2 individuals. So that's the kind of stuff I want to get more into, is the Earl Ruby stuff, the Samuel Ruby stuff, the stuff that we don't really get to cover that much. But unfortunately, there's no other way to discover the stuff until we go through the documents. And so that's what we're doing here. We got a fuck ton to go with these Jack Ruby documents. 16,000 pages of which would take me years to get through. So we're not going to do it very consistently. But we're going to do it for now because I'm pissed off at these Family Jewels documents, which we'll get back to later on next week. So, but that's going to do it for today, guys. Make sure you tune into Bloody History World War II. And if you sign up for Bloody History World War II, pay the $50 for the whole year, I'll send you a copy of my book for free, signed. So, it's going to do it for me, guys. I'll be back tomorrow. Thank you.